On July 9th, a Russian delegation led by the head of the Federation Council, Valentina Matvienko, landed in Beijing for a 3-day diplomatic visit to China. The goal? To further develop an already firm strategic partnership between the anti-imperialist world's most powerful geopolitical forces. There were high-level meetings going all the way up to President Xi Jinping. There was a visit to the Museum of the Chinese Communist Party, and there was even a bit of dancing. We were able to tag along with the Russian delegation to bring you this report, here on The Revolution Report. The first day of this diplomatic trip was filled with welcome receptions, a concert, and even a visit to the Museum of the Chinese Communist Party. This museum has hundreds of historical relics that the party has deemed of high government significance, including some of Karl Marx's original notes and the original cap that Mao Zedong wore during the Chinese Civil War. Later in the day, we took a trip to the Great Palace of the People, where the Russian delegation was to visit the leadership of China's National People's Congress. I'm here right now in the Great Hall of the People, which is right next to Tiananmen Square in Beijing, China. It's the assembly hall for the Chinese National People's Congress. And the reason I'm here right now is because there's actually a Russian delegation from the Federation Council here for the 8th meeting of the International Commission on Cooperation with the Chinese National People's Congress, which is happening right now. It's a several-day trip for the Russian delegation. We're at the first day of these meetings. I guess there's going to be more meetings that are going to happen over the next several days that constitute different parts of this meeting. But it's definitely an interesting experience for me as a communist. Right now we're in, the building of one of the most important legislative bodies of the Chinese government, where there's constantly high-profile Chinese communist officials, and it's been a really interesting experience so far because the Russian delegation is actually led by the head of the Russian Federation Council, the chairwoman. Her name is Valentina Matvienko, and just yesterday when the delegation got here, or maybe earlier this morning, I'm not sure, the footage just came out, the Russian delegation actually visited a museum of the Chinese Communist Party, and they loved it. Shortly after that meeting, it turned out Xi Jinping was in the building for a meeting with the head of the Russian delegation as well. Matvienko said it went great, and that both sides discussed the bright future that their strategic partnership has ahead of itself. One short-term indication of that positive trajectory mentioned at the press conference following the meeting is the fact that trade volume between China and Russia is expected to exceed $200 billion worth before the end of 2023, a record high for these colossal powers of the emerging multipolar world. Such cooperation is important now more than ever for Beijing and Moscow, in a world where the West is doing everything in its power to undermine them. So I'm right now on Tiananmen Square, where absolutely nothing out of the ordinary happened in 1989. It's a beautiful day, as you can see behind me. Red flags of the Chinese Communist Party, buildings all with this communist imagery, Mao Zedong over there. It's really cool, and today we're actually going to see, look, take a look over there. You can see some soldiers walking along. So today we're going to see basically a flower laying at this monument I'm not exactly sure about what, but we're going to take some footage of it, and I guess I'll explain it later in the video. We're going to see some soldiers as well, so it's definitely going to be an interesting day today here on Tiananmen Square. The next day we found ourselves on Tiananmen Square, where there was a wreath-laying ceremony at the Monument to the People's Heroes. It's a giant obelisk dedicated to those who fought in the century of anti-imperialist struggle, starting with the Opium Wars in the mid-19th century and ending with China's independence in the mid-20th century and the establishment of the People's Republic in 1949. Chinese soldiers welcomed the delegation alongside red flags and representatives of the Communist Party. Then later on it was on to a press conference, where I was able to ask the head of Russia's delegation about the geopolitical role BRICS is looking to play and what Moscow expected to come out of NATO's recent summit.
Сможет ли БРИКС стать альтернативной НАТО? И второй вопрос по поводу саммита НАТО, который начнется лишь через несколько часов. Ожидает ли Россия каких-то существенных изменений в плане мировой безопасности по итогам этого саммита?
Ну и Россия, и наши партнеры по БРИКСу не ставят задачу стать альтернативой каким-либо международным организациям или блокам. Мы считаем БРИКС и также и ШОС альтернативными площадками и будем прилагать усилия для формирования их в этом качестве, альтернативными площадками однополярному миру, где учитываются интересы только одного гегемона. Что касается НАТО, это военный агрессивный блок, который не гнушается никакими методами и даже бесчеловечными, чтобы обеспечить доминирование коллективного Запада. И идет на все тяжкие, что называется. Мне кажется, что уже точно пришло время отрегулировать правовым способом, то есть создать правовые условия вообще действий на планете различных военных блоков и союзов. Пока такого документа ни в ООН, ни в других организациях нет. И это позволяет им действовать так, как они считают нужным, не считаясь ни с чем другим мнением, не считаясь с другими интересами. Мне кажется, вот надо, и мы попробуем и на парламентском уровне это пообсуждать, что нужно подготовить предложение, направить их в Организацию Объединенных Наций, чтобы появились международные документы, положения международного права, которые бы четко и внятно регулировали деятельность военных блоков и союзов. Потому что сегодня они уже являются угрозой, реальной угрозой миру и международной стране. Первое, давайте дождемся результатов, и тогда можем уже сделать окончательные выводы, но если вы хотите мое мнение знать, то мне кажется, что никаких неожиданностей для нас не будет. Ни для дальнейших действий по обеспечению безопасности нашей страны, ни по действию специальной военной операции по задачам, которые перед ней стоят. На все ходы, они нам известны, на все возможные ходы. У нас есть ответы, у нас есть комплекс мер по обеспечению национальной безопасности. Мы никого не боимся, все ходы у нас записаны. Поэтому, на мой взгляд, неожиданностей никаких не будет. Но ничего хорошего мы не ждем, потому что действия НАТО, я уже сказала, стиль работы этой организации, они уже стали основным поставщиком плохих новостей для мира и провокаторами, дестабилизирующими ситуацию в мире, провоцирующими региональные конфликты и так далее. Конечно же, саммит НАТО не принесет мира ни Украине, ни в другом измерении. НАТО еще никому не принесло суверенитета, НАТО никому не принесло демократии, под флагом которой они часто, которой они часто прикрываются. И это такая агрессивная структура. Поэтому, если будут приняты решения, которые хоть в какой-то мере на данную угрозу, у нас есть адекватные ответы.
China is a huge, really beautiful country, so I was lucky that this diplomatic trip wasn't only in Beijing, but also in Dalian, a city in China's Liaoning province. It was the Russian delegation's last stop on its diplomatic tour, which saw a high-level meeting with the regional Communist Party secretary and a visit to a monument to the Soviet and Chinese soldiers who died in the fight against fascism in World War II. Nearby, there was another monument to Sino-Soviet friendship as well, called Eternal Glory to Heroes. We're not in Beijing anymore, we're in Dalian, which is a town or a city rather, in the Liaoning province of China. And right over here is actually a very interesting monument I wanted to show all of you. It's a monument to friendship between the Soviet Union and China, specifically in their mutual struggle against fascism. China against Japanese imperialism in the East, and the Soviet Union against German fascism, Nazism in Europe. As you can see behind me, this is a mural to that friendship. You can see Soviet soldiers on the left with a Soviet tank greeting the Chinese people in this interpretation, of the friendship that was founded throughout the Chinese Civil War, but also, of course, during its foundation in 1949, the People's Republic of China, and after. Now, over here we can also see a mural that is in both Chinese and Russian, which essentially, to give a rundown to those of you that don't speak Russian, it says "Eternal Glory," and in short, this is a memorial to in 1945 when the heroic Soviet army defeated the Nazis, and the Chinese defeated the Japanese as well. And it says at the end there, I just wanted to translate word for word this last part. Long live the eternal, unbreakable, fraternal friendship of the peoples of the two great countries of the Soviet Union and China. So this is a legacy of friendship between these two great nations that, even though the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore, modern Russia still enjoys this legacy with China, and they're still fighting this same anti-imperialist cause that they were back in the Second World War and throughout the Cold War. Now, around the back of this monument is actually an entrance to a museum that is in the base of the monument. So I just wanted to come in here and show you a little bit of that museum right now. You can see the entranceway. This is basically talking about the 1945 military operation that achieved the liberation of the northeastern part of China, rather. Kitai is the Russian word for it, that the Soviet forces underwent. So they helped China liberate their own country, right? So I'm going to show you some of the stuff in this museum so we can see some of the pictures and some of the objects as well. This is the former Russian President Medvedev there. So obviously a lot of high-profile people have visited this monument and the museum. You can see a World War II era machine gun here. It was used by the Chinese military and the Soviet military of that time period. See some of these historical pictures. And Also over here is a very nice socialist realist painting of victory over the Japanese, where the Soviets and the Chinese cooperated to that effect. Over here you could see a machine gun of the era as well. Again, both the Soviet military and the Chinese who were fighting the Japanese used this military equipment. A lot of it was supplied by the USSR in their fight for liberation, independence, and let's of course not forget their fight for socialism, their fight for communism. Just going to give you a walk through the museum here. Here we are. Here's a monument that looks pretty cool as well. Let's take a look at it. So that's basically the end of the museum. There's another machine gun here, as you can see. And of course, these are pictures illustrating the end of the war. Nuremberg trials, the victory parade on Red Square where the Red Army laid down the banners of Nazism. And of course at the end, when Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill were, deciding what to do in the post-war world. All in all, it was a productive trip to China for Russia's delegation. One episode in a long series of groundbreaking developments in the strategic partnership enjoyed by both countries. What a stark contrast to Washington's recent attempts at making friends and influencing China. Just hours before the Russian delegation landed in China, an American delegation led by U.S. Finance Secretary Janet Yellen had just left. That visit was characterized by an embarrassing Japanese-style bow addressed to Chinese officials and over 10 hours of talks that did nothing to improve relations that are now at their lowest in decades. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's trip came a bit earlier than Yellen's, and several days later, Biden called Xi Jinping a dictator. It all just goes to show Washington can no longer hide the aggressive nature of U.S. imperialism, and a new multipolar world is emerging from the decay of the old international order.